My name is Melissa, and at 32 years old, I never imagined I would become homeless after a simple Sunday dinner with my family. But that night in our quiet Seattle suburb, my mother's voice cut through me like a blade. She pointed to the front door, her eyes blazing with years of resentment, and screamed, "Get out and never come back." I wish I could say it was the first time I had heard those words. But this time, something inside me broke. This time, I actually listened. With nothing but my overnight bag and my pride in pieces, I walked out of the house where I'd spent my entire childhood, believing, somehow, that I was the problem. What my mother didn't know, what no one in that room suspected, was that I had been secretly paying their mortgage, $2,200 every single month for the last 3 years. Quietly, without credit or recognition, I had been the one keeping their home standing while she treated me as nothing more than a failure. Weeks later, when my father finally called and asked why the bank had sent them a foreclosure notice, the shock in his voice was something I will never forget. For the first time, the truth began to surface, and it changed everything. If you've ever faced toxic family dynamics, betrayal, or the crushing weight of being unappreciated, then stay with me. Comment where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and prepare yourself. Because the story I'm about to share will show you exactly how far one family can fall, and what happens when the quietest child finally refuses to stay silent. Growing up in the Carter household was like walking through a minefield where the explosions came not from war but from words. My family of 5 lived in a well-kept colonial-style home just outside Seattle. From the outside, it looked picture-perfect. Trimmed hedges, freshly painted shutters, the American dream. But inside those walls, love was rationed unequally, and I was always left hungry. My mother, Patricia, had impossibly high expectations. She wasn't content with good enough. For her, perfection was the only standard, and perfection always seemed to belong to someone else. My father, Daniel, was the peacekeeper, the man who would slip into my room after one of Mom's tirades, whispering, "It'll be okay, honey." But he never stood up to her. He just patched the wounds with words while she prepared the next cut. I was the youngest of 3. My brother, Michael, was 4 years older, and my sister, Rebecca, 2 years ahead of me. Michael was the golden child, the star athlete who could do no wrong. Rebecca was the polished one, graceful, always praised for her beauty and charm. And me, I was the afterthought, the one constantly measured against their achievements and found lacking. When Michael brought home a B on his report card, it was excused. He was too busy with football practice. When Rebecca got the same grade, it was brushed off. She was balancing student council and cheerleading. But when I came home with 5 A's and 1 B, my mother's face twisted in disappointment. "What happened here?" she demanded, tapping her finger against the lone B. "Did you not study enough?" Rebecca never got below an A-. It didn't matter that I'd spent hours bent over my textbooks, fighting sleep with cups of cold coffee. It didn't matter that I had earned 5 flawless grades. That 1 B was enough to erase the rest. The comparisons didn't stop at academics. If I brought a friend home, my mother would whisper sharp critiques once the door closed. "That girl, Sarah, she dresses cheap. I don't like her influence on you." If I wore jeans that were even slightly snug, she would wrinkle her nose and say, "Those make you look heavier than you are. Don't you care about your appearance?" By the time I was 12, I had learned to scan her face before speaking, to read the weather in the set of her jaw or the narrowing of her eyes. My friends thought I was shy. The truth was, I had been trained to measure every word, every step, against the possibility of setting her off. The worst battles were about my future. I loved numbers. I loved how they could tell a story, reveal a hidden truth, predict outcomes. Finance fascinated me. But when I said I wanted to study business in college, my mother scoffed so loudly it felt like she was laughing at my dreams. "Finance?" she sneered. "Melissa, no one takes women seriously in that field. You should be realistic, nursing, teaching, something respectable." Her words stung, but they also lit a fire in me. Secretly, I applied to top business programs, slipping the applications into the mail while she was out shopping for new curtains or hosting her bridge club. My father worked as a pharmaceutical sales manager for nearly 3 decades. He made enough for my mother to stay home, tending the house like it was her kingdom. She adored the status symbols. The 5-bedroom house, the designer furniture, the remodeled kitchen with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The house was her badge of honor, the proof she had made it. But she never acknowledged that my father's paycheck funded it all. And later, she would never acknowledge that I, too, was quietly helping to keep it standing. Childhood was not all screaming and silence. There were moments, brief, fragile moments, that hinted at something better. My father teaching me to ride my bike down the cul-de-sac, reading novels curled up in the window seat of my lavender-painted bedroom, Michael tossing a baseball in the living room and leaving a dent in the wall that still made me smile years later. But those moments were islands in an ocean of criticism, and they were quickly drowned out by the storms my mother brewed. By the time I hit high school, I had become adept at wearing a mask. At school, I was the hardworking student, the dependable friend. At home, I was the disappointment, the girl who was never quite enough. Rebecca glided through prom like a princess. Michael got a football scholarship and parades of praise. I sat in my room, calculating scholarship applications, because I knew my parents wouldn't help me pay for college. One evening during senior year, I remember standing in the kitchen, holding my acceptance letter to Cornell University. I was trembling with excitement, ready to share the news that I had gotten into a prestigious business program. But when I showed my mother, her smile was thin and her words sharp. Cornell? Well, I suppose it's good enough. But it isn't Harvard, is it? The letter crumpled slightly in my hand. The joy drained away, replaced with that familiar hollowness. Good enough never existed in my mother's world. Years later, I would realize that my mother's constant comparisons, her relentless criticisms, weren't about me failing. They were about her need for control, her own insecurities spilling over onto me. But as a teenager, all I felt was the weight of never being wanted for who I was. That was the foundation of my life. Years of walking on eggshells, years of being told I wasn't enough, years of believing that if I just worked harder, achieved more, maybe one day, I would earn the love that seemed so freely given to Michael and Rebecca. I never stopped trying. And in some ways, that relentless drive became both my curse and my salvation. Ambition, in my family, was tolerated only if it didn't outshine the narrative my mother had written for us. Mine didn't cooperate. At Cornell, I learned to live in the library stacks, the fluorescent hum my lullaby, the smell of highlighters and black coffee, the closest thing I had to comfort. I took the brutal course sequence the first years whisper about, and signed up for an unpaid wealth management internship in Manhattan this summer. Everyone else posted photos from Cape Cod. By August, I could build a discounted cash flow model in my sleep and explain risk like it was a language. I paid my own way, grants, scholarships, work-study, a campus job scanning IDs at the gym at 6 a.m., and graduated a semester early to save tuition. When a Seattle firm recruited me, I said yes for reasons that sounded rational. Growth track, West Coast markets. But the truth was simpler. It put me close enough to home to manage the distance like a valve. I could turn it down when I needed to breathe, but I could always rush back if my father sounded small on the phone. It also kept me in the same time zone as my mother, whose disapproval traveled at the speed of light. Entry level meant 70-hour weeks, and the kind of exhaustion that made you weep at toothpaste commercials. I studied nights for my licensing exams, circled test dates on a sticky note stuck to the microwave, and learned to love leftovers. On Fridays, when the bullpen thinned and someone ordered pizza, I stayed. I wasn't the funniest or the loudest, but I became the person clients trusted to translate chaos into choices. When I made senior associate, it wasn't luck. It was repetition refined into skill. What no one at the office saw were the Saturdays I spent in a different uniform, daughter, fixer, supply chain for a household that insisted it didn't need me. I drove 40 minutes each way with Costco rotisserie chickens and bags of groceries because my mother didn't trust our brands and my father had started counting pennies. I replaced the filter in their furnace when it made a sound like a swallowed cough and scheduled a roof inspection when I noticed daylight in the attic. When the water heater died in January, I put the replacement on my card and told myself it was the humane thing to do. I kept my own life small to make room for theirs. I learned to love the bus because the parking rate downtown felt like theft. I drove a decade-old sedan with a heater that took 15 minutes to commit to being warm. My friends upgraded apartments with water views and gym concierges. I renewed my lease on a one-bedroom that looked out over a gray alley and the glitter of someone else's living room. When coworkers invited me to Vegas for a spur-of-the-moment weekend, I smiled and said I was trying to be smart this quarter. What I meant was that every dollar had a direction before it had a chance to wander. Relationships required a bandwidth I kept giving away. Evan, a software engineer who laughed with his whole face, lasted a year. He liked planning weekend hikes and imagining trips that involved passport stamps. I kept rescheduling because something came up, and my something was usually a leak, a bill, a rumor of a crisis that I alone could prevent. When he finally said, "I need to be with someone who can let go," there wasn't a villain in the room, just two people standing on different shores, watching the same tide pull me back home. My siblings lived easier. Michael's Booster Club glory translated into an old boys network that found him jobs when he needed them and forgave him when he didn't deserve it. He bought a lifted pickup and posted photos of tailgates in the stadium parking lot, never once paying full price for anything larger than a cooler. Rebecca's wedding was an operatic production, string quartet, 32 centerpieces, a dessert table that looked like a magazine, and when the venue demanded the final installment, my parents wrote the check like it was a moral victory. When I offered to contribute, my mother said, "You keep your little savings," with a tone that made both words feel like an insult. So I kept saving and I kept giving. When my father lost his job, I added structure to my charity. I built a spreadsheet with tabs labeled quietly, numbers tucked behind color-coded cells, utilities, property taxes, the mortgage no one discussed. The only way to make the math work was to cut mine. No Peloton, no houseplants I'd inevitably kill, no winter coat that didn't require 3 layers underneath to feel like one. I learned the alchemy of making a $10 grocery run look like abundance, and I stopped entering the bookstore near my office because every aisle felt like temptation. I did not tell anyone. Not the friends who praised my discipline. Not the mentor who urged me to move to the New York office, where the promotions came faster and the nights came later. "You're ready," he said, tapping the folder with my numbers on it. "Don't let Seattle make you small." I said I was thinking about it. Then I didn't think about it again because the call came that the oven had died or the tax bill had arrived like a fist. The silence had a cost measured in a currency my balance sheet didn't track. I began waking at 3:17 a.m., the time my mind chose for audits. I kept a notepad on the nightstand and wrote, "Check escrow, move bonus to reserves, call roofer, call dad again." On client calls, I could hear the confidence in my voice. At home, even the kettle sounded like it doubted me. I tried a meditation app that promised to sand down the edges of worry. It taught me how to breathe around panic, but not how to stop fabricating contingencies. I measure myself against a future I couldn't afford to want. My colleagues posted engagement photos in places with chandeliers. I learned how to patch drywall and calculated the cost of missing a life I didn't have. When my manager asked if I could take on a marquee client, the kind with a travel schedule that ate holidays, I said yes because I was good at yes. Then I blocked off Sundays because my father's voice on the phone, smaller every week, felt like a thread I had to keep from snapping. Every time I turned into my parents' neighborhood, a knot formed beneath my sternum. It wasn't fear exactly. Fear looks forward. This was muscle memory, the body bracing for something it learned long ago. I rang the doorbell and smiled the way you smile when the photographer says, "One more." I scrubbed pots with effort disproportionate to the task, because if I left the kitchen spotless, maybe the conversation would be kind. Afterward, I drove home past the lit windows of houses where other families were learning different lessons. In my apartment, I returned emails and chipped away at the exam prep I had promised myself I'd finish before spring. Sometimes I wondered what it would feel like to place my own life at the center of the page, to write plans that didn't fit around someone else's emergency. But most nights, I told myself stories about good daughters and obligations that sound like love, and I slept hard enough to do it again. I didn't view any of it as sacrifice. Sacrifices are ceremonial witnessed. Mine were private economies, small and daily, and they knit themselves into a routine that felt like survival. I believed I could carry it all if I just adjusted the angle. I believed there would be a season after this one. I believed, most of all, that the ledger would balance when the people I loved were safe. I was wrong about the balance. Not about love. My father's 60th birthday should have been a celebration, a moment for laughter and reflection. Instead, it became the night every carefully hidden fracture in our family cracked wide open. I drove to their home on a crisp April afternoon, clutching the gift I'd spent months planning, a Rolex Submariner, the very model my father had once admired wistfully in a magazine. Maybe when I retire, he had said back then, with a smile that carried both pride and resignation. Retirement never came the way he imagined. I wanted this to be my way of giving back, a tangible reminder of his worth after years of sacrifice. The house looked the same as always. The manicured lawn, the pristine shutters, the dining table already set with china that only appeared on holidays. My mother greeted me with a stiff hug and the immediate remark, "Oh, you cut your hair again." It was finally starting to look nice. I swallowed the sting and carried my overnight bag upstairs, the familiar lavender walls of my old bedroom closing in like a time capsule of expectations unmet. Dinner was pot roast, my mother's choice, not mine. I had made reservations at a restaurant my father loved, but she waved it off. "We don't need to waste money. I've already cooked." The irony, given what I was doing in secret for their finances, almost made me laugh. Almost. The conversation was stilted, each attempt at normalcy collapsing into my mother's complaints. The roast was delicious, but the wine flowed too freely for my father. He grew quiet, his gaze sinking deeper into the table with each glass. Then came the gifts. Rebecca sent a photo frame engraved with "World's Best Dad." Michael's present was a Seahawks jersey. And then it was my turn. I handed over the small blue box with trembling hands. My father opened it slowly, and when the watch caught the light, his face lit with a joy I had longed to see again. "Melissa, this is too much," he stammered, voice thick with emotion. "Of course you can accept it," I insisted, blinking back tears. "You deserve it. Happy birthday, Dad." But my mother's eyes had narrowed into slits. "How much did that cost?" she demanded. Her tone was sharp, slicing the air in two. "Patricia," my father warned, but she wasn't finished. "It must be nice, Melissa, having so much disposable income while we're counting pennies for groceries." The room froze. My father tried to cover the tension with forced laughter, but the damage was done. Conversation dissolved, and I excused myself early, retreating to my room where I texted my friend Lena, "Remind me why I do this to myself." The next morning, I came downstairs to the smell of coffee and the muffled hum of voices. The study door was cracked open, and their words drifted out like ghosts. "We can't keep doing this, Patricia," my father said, his voice frayed. "The credit cards are maxed out. The property taxes are due. We have to tell her." "Tell her what?" my mother snapped. "That we're failing?" That's exactly what she wants, to swoop in and play savior. "She would help us," my father pleaded. "I'm not taking charity from my own child." She shot back. "We'll figure it out." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. Figure it out? They had been figuring out on my dime for 3 years. And still, my mother's pride twisted everything into an insult. When they emerged, I had already made my decision. I sat them down with coffee and spoke carefully. I couldn't help overhearing. I began. "I know things have been difficult since Dad lost his job. I want to help professionally. This is what I do. I can create a financial plan, help you refinance, build a budget." My mother's face turned icy. "So now, we need your professional help? You think we're incompetent?" "That's not what I said," I replied, my voice shaking but steady. "But things sound serious, and I have knowledge that could help." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Little Miss Perfect with all the answers. You've had everything handed to you." The unfairness of it cut deep. Nothing had been handed to me. I worked for every inch of ground I stood on, sacrificed years of my life so they could keep theirs. My voice rose. "Mom, that's not true. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I'm trying to help you now." "We don't need your help," she snapped. "And we certainly don't need your judgment. Our problems are none of your business. Dad just said you're underwater. I pressed. The taxes, the credit cards. My father's eyes flickered to mine, weary and defeated. Your mother's upset. Maybe we should discuss this later. That was when something in me cracked. Years of silence, years of swallowing pain, years of being the scapegoat. There won't be another time, I said, my voice trembling with rage. This pattern never changes. Mom attacks, Dad enables, and I'm supposed to take it because we're family. I'm done. My mother surged to her feet, her chair clattering to the ground. How dare you speak to us like that in our own home? After everything we've done for you? What exactly have you done for me? I demanded. Made me feel inadequate at every turn? Criticized my appearance, my career, my life? Taken my financial support without a word of gratitude? Her eyes narrowed. Financial support? What are you talking about? I almost swallowed the truth. But this time I didn't. I've been paying your mortgage. For 3 years. $20 to $100 every month out of my pocket. The silence was deafening. My father's face drained of color. My mother's mouth opened and closed like she had been struck dumb. And then, with a voice like ice, she whispered the words that sealed everything. Get out. Get out of my house and never come back. Patricia, my father started, but she cut him off with a shriek. If you think we're such burdens, then leave. Go live your perfect little life and leave us alone. I looked at my father, desperate for him to say something, to stand up for me. But he just looked down, his new Rolex gleaming like a cruel joke. I picked up my bag. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. Fine. You'll get your wish. I'm gone. I walked out of the house, closing the door quietly behind me, knowing it was the last time I would ever enter it as a daughter who belonged there. The drive back to Seattle blurred into a tunnel of headlights and rain. My hands clenched so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles burned. I kept waiting for the tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, I felt an emptiness so sharp it bordered on numbness. I had finally spoken the truth, finally laid bare the sacrifice that had drained me for years, and all it earned me was exile. When I pulled into the parking lot of my modest apartment building, I sat in the car for nearly an hour. The engine ticked as it cooled, the silence inside pressing on my chest. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena. How's the birthday weekend going? Surviving. I stared at the words until they blurred, then finally called her. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears when I said, she told me to get out and never come back. And I left. Lena was at my door 20 minutes later, carrying a bottle of cheap red wine and takeout from the deli down the street. She pulled me into her arms before I could protest, whispering, first food, then wine, then tears if you need them. I let her guide me to the couch, where I finally broke, the sobs tearing out of me like they had been waiting years for this permission. The days that followed were a haze. I went through the motions at work, my professional mask perfectly in place, while inside, I felt gutted. I advised clients on investments, mapped out retirement plans, smiled at meetings, yet at night I lay awake, haunted by the echo of my mother's words. Get out. Never come back. My father called several times that first week, each voicemail a vague plea. Melissa, please call me back. We need to talk. But there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the storm that had destroyed everything. Just the familiar expectation that I would once again be the bigger person, smoothing over the wreckage. I let each call go unanswered. The silence weighed heavily. For years, I had structured my life around theirs, their mortgage, their crises, their approval that never came. Now, with the payment stopped, with the bond severed, I should have felt free. But freedom felt like floating without anchor, like drifting into a void where even pain had lost its definition. Nights were the worst. I would wake at 3 a.m., the time my body had learned to conduct secret audits, and instinctively reach for the notepad on my nightstand. But there were no numbers to fix anymore, no spreadsheets to rebalance, just empty pages and the suffocating realization that my sacrifices had meant nothing to them. In therapy sessions with Dr. Collins, I found myself struggling to even articulate the betrayal. I don't understand, I told her once, voice shaking. I gave everything, my time, my money, my peace of mind, and she still saw me as a failure. She still hated me. Dr. Collins leaned forward gently. Melissa, you keep asking why she didn't love you the way you needed. But the real question is, why have you believed, all these years, that you had to earn that love? The words cut deep. All my life, I had believed that if I achieved enough, gave enough, bet myself far enough, one day I would finally be enough for her. And yet here I was, $79,200 poorer, emotionally shattered, and still the ungrateful daughter in her eyes. The shame was heavy. Not just shame at her rejection, but shame at my own blindness. How had I allowed myself to be used so thoroughly, so completely, without ever demanding acknowledgement? Lena tried to pull me out of the spiral. She dragged me on long walks around Green Lake, cooked me dinners heavy with garlic and laughter, and reminded me that I was more than my mother's bitterness. But even as I smiled at her jokes, inside I carried a hollow ache that refused to fade. One night, sitting on Lena's balcony with the city lights shimmering beyond, I whispered, I feel like I don't have a family anymore. She squeezed my hand, maybe not in the traditional sense, but family doesn't always mean blood. Sometimes family is the people who choose you who show up. Like me. Like the life you've built for yourself. Her words planted a seed of something I hadn't dared hope for. Maybe this exile wasn't just an ending. Maybe it was the painful, necessary clearing before something new could grow. But before I could even begin to rebuild, the phone rang again. This time, when I saw my father's name on the screen, a strange calm settled over me. I knew what was coming. The bank had finally sent the notice, and my father, bewildered, would demand to know why the mortgage payments had stopped. The moment I answered, the sound of his voice confirmed it. The truth I had hidden for 3 years was about to erupt, and when it did, none of us would ever be the same. When my father finally reached me, his voice trembled with confusion. Melissa, the bank sent us a notice. It says we're behind on the mortgage. I don't understand. The payments have always gone through automatically. What's happening? I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. This was the moment I had dreaded and craved all at once. Dad, I said quietly, those automatic payments weren't from you. They were from me. For 3 years, I've been covering your mortgage. Every single month. The silence on the line stretched, so long I wonder if the call had dropped. Finally, he whispered, That's not possible. We would have known. Would you? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. You never looked. You just assumed the money was there. I lived in a tiny apartment, drove an old car, skipped vacations, so you and Mom could stay in that house. And you never once asked how. His shock was palpable. Melissa, why didn't you tell us? Because I knew exactly how Mom would react, I said. She would turn my help into an insult, into proof that I thought you were weak. And guess what? That's exactly what she did when I offered advice. He exhaled, broken. 3 years, $80,000? $79,200. I corrected bitterly. And now it's over. I'm done setting myself on fire to keep you warm. There was another long pause before he spoke again, his voice raw. Your mother doesn't know. She thinks I found consulting work. I was ashamed to admit I was stocking shelves at 60. I wanted to protect her pride. I almost laughed. Pride had been the fuel of every fire in our house. Well, pride is about to meet reality. The bank won't wait. In the days that followed, the fallout came fast. My mother's facade began to crack when the realtor's appraisal confirmed what I had known all along. They couldn't afford the house. The mahogany dining table, the granite countertops, the manicured lawn, they were monuments to denial, and denial doesn't pay bills. But here's where the twist came. I didn't rescue them this time. I let the walls tremble. For the first time in my life, I didn't patch the roof or write the check. Instead, I redirected that $2,200 to myself. I met with a lender, ran the numbers, and within weeks, I had placed a deposit on a condo of my own. A sunlit 2-bedroom with bay windows overlooking the city. For once, the mortgage statement bore only my name. And yet, the second twist unfolded in a way I hadn't expected. When I met my father for coffee one Thursday, he looked older, worn thin. But his words startled me. Melissa, I'm sorry. Not just for that night, but for years of letting your mother tear you down. For watching and saying nothing. His eyes were wet. I should have protected you. I didn't know what to say. I had waited my whole life for him to choose me, to acknowledge the weight I had carried. Thank you, I managed, though part of me still doubted it would last. Then he added, your mother, she knows now. She saw the bank records. She cried, Melissa. She actually cried. I didn't believe it until I saw it with my own eyes. A week later, she asked to meet me, not at the house, but at a quiet cafe. She arrived smaller than I'd ever seen her, stripped of the armor of hairspray and sharp words. For the first time in my life, she admitted the truth. I was jealous, she whispered. You had the career I gave up, the independence I never found. I turned my regrets into your prison. And I'm sorry. I didn't forgive her, not then. But I listened. And in that moment, I realized the second twist. My mother's cruelty hadn't come from strength, but from weakness. Her rage had been the mask for her own disappointment. Knowing that didn't erase the scars, but it gave me clarity. I laid my boundaries out like stones on the table. If we are to have any relationship, it will be on new terms. I won't bankroll your lifestyle. I won't accept criticism disguised as concern. And if you cross those lines, I will walk away again. And this time I won't come back. To my astonishment, she nodded. For once, she didn't argue. She just whispered, understood. In the months that followed, change rippled through all of us. They sold the house, downsized to a modest townhouse. My father found steadier work at a small firm, humbler but happier. My mother, desperate to rebuild, took a receptionist job at a real estate office, her first job in decades. Ironically, it awakened something in her. She studied, earned her license, and began building the career she had abandoned 40 years ago. For me, the transformation was even greater. With the mortgage payments lifted, I invested in myself. My new condo became a sanctuary, painted in colors my mother would have hated, but that finally felt like mine. I adopted a cat, Leo, who greeted me each night with a dignity no human in my family had ever shown me. I poured my reclaimed energy into work, and within 6 months, I was promoted to lead a team. And when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the daughter begging for approval. I saw a woman who had rescued herself. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't about making them suffer. It was about proving, to myself most of all, that I could live fully without their permission. That by refusing to be their crutch, I had forced them to stand on their own feet. And that, in the end, was the cruelest truth of all. My absence did what my presence never could. It saved them. In the end, what I learned was simple and devastating. Love without respect is not love at all. For years, I had sacrificed everything. My money, my time, my peace, believing that one day my family would see me, value me, choose me. But when I finally walked away, I discovered something far more powerful. I didn't need their approval to build a life worth living. Today, I stand in my own home, surrounded by choices that are mine alone. My parents are learning to survive without leaning on me, and for once, I no longer carry the crushing weight of their denial. The freedom is both terrifying and exhilarating, but it's real. And now I leave you with a question. What would you have done in my place? Would you have kept paying the price for their pride, or walked away to reclaim your own life? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about resilience, family, and finding strength in the most unexpected places. Because sometimes, the greatest act of revenge is simply living free.